I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching another episode of Explained with me. On today's episode, we discuss the NATO troop deployment in Afghanistan. US President Donald Trump has recently claimed that NATO forces stayed away from the front line during the war in Afghanistan. This has drawn criticism from British politicians as well as Trump's own former aides. UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has issued an unprecedented rebuke to Trump. Starmer has called the remarks by Trump insulting and appalling remarks about British troops in Afghanistan. Prince Harry has stated that sacrifices by NATO troops in Afghanistan deserved respect. Prince Harry was deployed twice to Afghanistan. He also has paid tribute to NATO troops who were killed in the conflict, of which 457 people were from UK's service personnel. John Bolton, Trump's former security advisor, has also called Trump's comments about NATO troops outrageous and harmful. Trump's former National Security Advisor Herbert Raymond McMaster, who served as senior U.S. officer in Afghanistan, has stated that Trump's comments were insulting to those who were fighting in the country. Republican Congressman Don Bacon has also criticized Trump's remarks, stating that it was wrong to make such comments about NATO troops and that Trump probably did not know the truth. Let's in fact listen into some more comments that are coming in response to Trump's statement.
Let me start by paying tribute to the 457 of our armed services who lost their lives in Afghanistan. I will never forget their courage, their bravery, and the sacrifice that they made for their country. There are many also who were injured, some with life-changing injuries. And so I consider President Trump's remarks to be insulting and frankly appalling. And I'm not surprised they've caused such hurt to the loved ones of those who were killed or injured, and in fact, across the country.
It is complete nonsense. I spoke to parents of young men who had lost their lives in Afghanistan, and I think it is a disgrace to denigrate their memory like that. Every November, we celebrate our fallen. It's not just World War I or World War II. It is more recent conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think that there is too much careless talk from President Trump. He clearly doesn't know the history of what happened. I'm somebody who believes in NATO. It is a force for good in the world. We need a strong NATO. We mustn't have these sorts of throwaway remarks that actually weaken the strong relationship between those countries in the alliance. I think the PM should ask for an apology, and the PM should ask for a retraction or a clarification of those remarks. Something similar happened when J.D. Vance made comments like that. I remember sending a message, because he's someone who I do know, just saying, I don't think people understood what you said. Would you like to say it again? And he did so. So that would be welcome.
He is completely wrong to criticise a contribution that Britain and some of the other NATO allies made in Afghanistan. And we need to also remember it's not just those killed in action and the massive impact on the families they left behind, but the thousands of NATO troops who were injured. This country alone, 3,000 plus serious combat injuries as a result of being wounded on the battlefield.
Tak, mamy pretensje za tą wypowiedź, oczekujemy słowa przepraszam. Nie zmieni to naszego podejścia do naszych amerykańskich przyjaciół, od których naprawdę dużo jako polscy żołnierze nauczyliśmy się, ale też nie uchylaliśmy się od tego, żeby w sytuacjach trudnych chronić życie amerykańskich żołnierzy i też własną piersią często ryzykować własne życie, aby nasi towarzysze broni byli bezpieczni.
So what was the Afghanistan war? The United States intervened in Afghanistan in 2001 following the September 11th attacks, the 9/11 on New York and Washington. Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, planned and launched those attacks from Afghanistan, where it was being sheltered by the Taliban regime. At the time, Taliban controlled most of the country and refused to hand over bin Laden despite international pressure. With near unanimous support from Congress and backed by NATO allies, the U.S. launched Operation Enduring Freedom in October 2001. The initial goal was to destroy Al-Qaeda, remove the Taliban from power, and prevent Afghanistan from remaining a safe haven for terror groups. Within weeks, the Taliban government collapsed and a new interim administration was installed under Hamid Karzai with the support from United Nations, but the war did not end there. As al-Qaeda leaders escaped and the Taliban regrouped, the mission expanded. The US and NATO shifted towards nation-building, training Afghan security forces, supporting democratic elections, and rebuilding a country devastated by decades of war. Over time, the conflict turned into a prolonged insurgency. Taliban attacks resurged, civilian casualties rose, and questions grew about corruption, governance, and the sustainability of the Afghan state. After 20 years of fighting, trillions of dollars spent, and thousands of lives lost, the United States ended its military presence in 2021 and the Taliban returned to power. But in almost 2 decades of US involvement in Afghanistan, were NATO troops ever involved? Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty has only been invoked once in NATO's history, and it happened after the September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States. This clause is also known as the Collective Defense Provision, meaning an attack on the one NATO member is considered as an attack on all members. Less than 24 hours after the attacks, NATO held an emergency meeting and decided that if it was proven the attacks were directed from abroad, Article 5 would apply. The US presented evidence linking the attack to al-Qaeda, leading to the official invocation on October 2nd of 2001. The immediate actions included the deployment of NATO's radar aircraft to patrol American skies and naval forces to monitor the Mediterranean. These efforts, alongside the later NATO involvement in Afghanistan, marked a significant moment in the alliance's history. Now, how many NATO troops were actually deployed in Afghanistan? In 2001, the International Security Assistance Force, or the ISAF, was deployed under individual NATO allies' leadership on a 6-month rotational basis. Initially, the mission focused on assisting the Afghan government in securing Kabul. In August 2003, NATO took command of ISAF, and the UN Security Council later authorized its expansion to cover all of Afghanistan. ISAF became one of the largest coalition in history and NATO's longest, most challenging mission. At its peak, more than 130,000 troops from 50 NATO and partner countries were involved in the effort. According to various government sources and NATO data, the United States made the largest contribution with a peak deployment of 100,000 troops at a given point of time, and also the highest number of fatalities at 2,461 people. This was a significant part of the overall NATO effort, which included troops from 50 countries. While the total number of troops deployed over 2 decades is much more, the maximum number of troops from almost every country was during the 2011 surge. The 2011 surge refers to a major escalation of the war initiated by US President Barack Obama. It was a strategic shift aimed at breaking the momentum of the Taliban insurgency, securing key population centers, and fast-tracking the training of Afghan national security forces so that the US and NATO could eventually withdraw. While the surge began in late 2009, it reached its peak in 2011, marking the period of the highest troop concentration and the most intense fighting of the 20-year conflict. The United Kingdom followed with a peak deployment of 10,000 troops, and 457 British service members have lost their lives. Canada also made a strong contribution with 3,000 troops deployed and 159 fatalities. Other countries with significant deployments include France with 4,000 troops, Germany with 5,350 troops, and Italy with 4,200 troops. Poland, Denmark, and Spain also had strong presences in the region. Within the 20 years of the conflict, over 1 million troops from NATO and partner countries served. Of this, the United States had the highest deployment at 800,000 troops deployed over 2 decades. The UK sent 150,000 total troops, while Canada deployed 40,000 soldiers. Contribution from other NATO troops totaled to around 150,000 to 200,000 troops. These contributions, both in terms of troops and lives lost, highlights the significant role NATO and its partners played in Afghanistan, making it one of the most challenging and costly military missions in history. So as Trump claims, did NATO troops stay away from the front lines in Afghanistan? Data shows the large number of NATO troops deployed in the country over a 20-year period. Yes, the number of troops was not as high as those deployed by the United States. However, the question here arises that was it not the responsibility of the United States as the primary force behind the intervention to have the largest deployment? Ethicists also argue that once the Taliban government was ousted, the US had a moral duty to help stabilize Afghanistan, as the mission evolved from a fight against terrorism to a nation-building endeavor. The US increased its troop presence to ensure the survival of the Afghan government. This, in many ways, was a complicated and costly journey, one that raises questions about the US's role in global conflicts moving forward. That's all for this episode of Explained. Stay tuned as we bring you more in-depth insights and stories that matter.